on the threshold of existence. Remember this moment. It is a great moment. For in years to come, you will be judged based on what you dare to become today. The Iron Youth of Germany. My friends, we are fortunate to be alive at a great time. Your deeds will be the water nourishing the growth of a strong and noble root. Stand still and listen up, Leiderman! The Kaiser needs soldiers, not children. I am certain that I will see most of you again soon here at home. Your sword returned to its scabbard with honor and respect. A cross crafted from iron proudly displayed upon your chest. However, take heed of this. In the darkest of hours, let me assure you it will happen that prior to an attack, you will harbor doubts. But this is not the time to concede to any mental weakness. Any unsteadiness, any hesitation is a betrayal of the fatherland. For modern war is like a game of chess. It is never about an individual soldier. Our only care is for the entirety of the body. You have the chance to earn the right to wear the uniforms you have been given. And by going to the front line in Flanders, will pierce the enemy. And then you will, in a few short weeks, finally march on Paris! Our future, the future of Deutschland, lies in the hands of its greatest generation. My friends, that is you see! Therefore, off to the camps for the Kaiser, God, and the fatherland!
Hello and welcome to Book versus Movie. This is a podcast where we read books that have been adapted into movies and then we try to decide which we like better, the book or the movie. I am Margot P. of CologneDeBook.com and this is my good friend and co-host Margot D. of Brooklyn Fit Chick.
Hi everyone.
I'm on the road, so I'm in the car. I'm literally on the road. I'm not driving. I'm not in motion. I'm parked in the shade I was just saying I'm in almond country of Northern California, where it is about 100 degrees. But I am delighted to be able to join. This is the age that we live in. So if you're new, welcome, welcome, welcome. This is a podcast where we talk about movies that have been adapted from books, but we really will do any movie that's been adapted from any kind of literary source. So it could be a short story or a novella or a magazine article or even a song or a poem. We will consider it as long as it is easy for us to get our eyes and hands on, as long as we can get the source material and the movie is streaming on a major platform, we will consider it. We are wrapping up Banned Books Month, which is something we do for the month of September. And we got I think we had an extra week this September, which was kind of nice.
Mm-hmm.
And next month, which is October, which is in a couple of days, next month, we will be doing spooky, scary type movies for the entire month. And we are still looking for ideas for that. We've been doing the show for 10 years now. So we've covered a lot of spooky movies. And so, yeah, if you have ideas for movies that we could do, that we could cover, let us know. There's a few places where you can make those suggestions, meet other listeners of this podcast, and interact with us on the internet.
We do have a basic Facebook page. Be sure to like it. The episodes are posted there first, but we're much more interactive in our private Facebook group. You just type in Book vs. Movie Podcast Group in Facebook and ask to join. And we really do just talk about books and movies there. It's a nice, safe space, especially election season. People get a little active in their Facebook groups. We just talk about books and movies there. On Twitter, Instagram, and Threads, we're at Book versus N Movie. And then we have an old-timey email, bookversusmoviepodcast@gmail.com. And if you would like some stickers, send us your address via email, and we will drop them in the mail for you. And we should also mention that the book, song, poem, whatever it is, needs to be something we can easily get our hands on. And the movie needs to be streaming on a major app.
And if you really enjoy the show, you can also support us on Patreon. And I understand we have a new Patreon member.
We do. Ben just joined our Patreon page. Thank you, Ben. We, like Margot said, we've been doing the show for 10 years. So we've decided to take everything from 2021 and then previous to that, and that goes on our Patreon wall. Recent episodes are Elvis and Me, In a Lonely Place, The Parent Trap. We just dropped The Invisible Man, the one with Elizabeth, the Scientologist. I can't remember. Moss. Coming up, we have Invasion of the Body Snatchers, The Picture of Dorian Gray, The Bad Seed, Sleeping Beauty. So all of you that support us on Patreon, thank you so very much. We really appreciate it.
So we're wrapping up Banned Books Month. And just to recap, let me see if I can remember them all. We did, I know we did 1984,
Mm-hmm.
Peyton Place,
Mm-hmm.
Where the Wild Things Are.
Yeah.
Was there another one?
I'll look it up.
And all of those have been banned in the United States for one reason or another. Never a good reason. Because banning books is something that jerks and Nazis do. And speaking of Nazis,
Yeah.
today's banned book is a book that was banned by the Nazis. So we're taking a little bit of a. I did forget one. Who did I forget?
To Kill a Mockingbird. We covered that first.
Of course. One of the most banned books of all time. Of course. So like all of those books, this book was banned, and we'll get into why and all of that in just a moment. We're talking today about, and you've seen the title, I'm sure, All Quiet on the Western Front by Erich Maria Remarque. Now, I have never read this book before. Had you?
No, I'm kind of surprised, but no, I have never read it.
I'm very surprised that I've not read this book. And I have a vague memory of having a choice for some reason in school between reading this book and reading the Red Badge of Courage.
I was just going to say that.
By Stephen Crane.
I did read that one.
And I chose the Red Badge of Courage, which I seem to recall not liking very much. I just couldn't get into it.
Mm-hmm.
I know, because it's not for me. I just feel like it's not, I'm not the intended audience, of course. But I'm not the intended audience for this book either. And I don't know about you, but I really got into this book.
I love this book.
Spoiler alert, I loved it.
Yeah, I love this book. I love this movie. This is going to be a great discussion.
I'm very excited. But let's talk about this rather extraordinary author.
I think I should let you all know I've never taken any German. So if I mispronounce something, I'm going to apologize for that now.
Yes. Sorry in advance.
Yeah, I apologize in advance. So Erich Maria Remarque, he was born June 22nd, 1898 in Osnabrück, Germany. When he was 18 years old, he enlisted into what they called the Great War at the time, which we now know as World War I. And it wasn't easy. It was a really rough experience, and it damaged him personally. And he did live. He did survive through the war, but he lost almost all of his friends and just about everything we will talk about in this book. Almost all of it literally happened to him. But when he got out of the war and he came home, he tried many ways to make a living. He tried being a teacher for a while. He had some odd jobs, and then he was around 28, 29, he started writing these stories, and he spaced them out. And at the first time that this book was printed, it was actually in a magazine, and it was serialized. But that came out in 1928, late 28, and then in a German newspaper, Vossische Zeitung. I am so sorry, y'all. This is doing the best we can. But the book was eventually published, and then it was published in Germany, and then it was also published in the States right after that. And both places, it was a huge deal all over Europe and in America, because World War I was very, very rough on the planet. This war, it was very bloody. It was incredibly violent, and it had was it 18 million people died? It was an extraordinary number of deaths.
It's hard to wrap your head around the absolute devastation to this generation of young men, and in all of the countries that were involved. And of course, the U.S., much like in World War II, joined kind of late in the game, or later. It had already started, was already very much in full swing when the U.S. enters the war. And that's kind of at the point where this story takes place. I mean, I can imagine better now that I've read this book, but
Yeah.
how you just couldn't. How do you live in anything like a normal world again after experiencing something like that? It's extraordinary.
It's the first war where chemical weapons were used. So they had to have gas masks invented for these men. And some of them died, in a room. They could be in a room and all of a sudden, like the gas would go off. They put their masks on and then if they take them off too quickly and they all died. I mean, and then on top of that, there was the flu that was brought to all around the world after this war, which was directly related to this war. And that killed millions of people. So then they go through the 20s and there's rebuilding going on in Europe and then America, the roaring 20s. And then we had a stock market crash. And so people were very much like, what did we even go to a war for? What was even happening? We even talked about in DC, there were World War I veterans who were so broke they needed their money. They wanted to cash early, a pension from the army. And there was devastation on land, at Washington, D.C. of soldiers. So it's a very 1929, 1930. It's a very tumultuous time. And I feel because I'm looking at old newspapers for reviews when I looked at this, and it was on a lot of people's mind. Continually, mainstream papers were saying, why did we even send people to war? Why did we even do this? And so this is part of the reason it struck people because, I mean, you hear throughout this novel, like our protagonist is only 18, 19 years old and just how young he is and how little he knows about the whole world and his friends. And they just go into it because their teachers told them about the fatherland and that it is an honor for you to serve. And there hadn't been a war for many years. And so they didn't know,
Yes.
they had no way they didn't have a father or grandfather even to turn to and say, this is what happened when I was enlisted. Like, you might want to rethink this. They didn't have that.
And it's you can't help but think more than any other war that I can think of, you can't help but think how duped these young men were because, as you say, they're recruited by these older gentlemen who had never fought in a war, most of them. Or if they had, it was a completely archaic form of warfare compared to what they were going into. This is the first time we've got airplanes, we've got tanks, we've got flamethrowers and chemical weapons. The people who are sending these young men to war had never experienced any of those things. And yet they're throwing these young lives into harm's way and just unleashing this devastation of modern weaponry on them that they are so ill prepared to deal with. I just can't even like I say, my brain will not accept how many lives were lost in this conflict. It's so difficult to understand.
There's an army station near me, an armory, excuse me, and it's dedicated from World War I in my neighborhood and the number of names that are on it. And then there's another one that's only a mile away and there's the number of names on that. It's just, it was incredible. And so one of the reviews I read, they were talking about like, well, they have ROTCs in schools now in America. What are they telling these men and women? Like, what are they telling these people?
Wow.
Yeah. So it was very much like it was, it was a very passionate project. Let me just give you a little bit more about our author. He did write sequels to it. His other books are Arch of Triumph, Three Comrades, Heaven Has No Favorites. He was married when he published this book. It was very controversial in his homeland of Germany. The leaders were not happy about this. They thought it was an insult. Goebbels was one of the ones that was in the government who said,
yeah, by leaders he means Nazis.
I'm saying fascists, horrible monsters. We're saying that this is an insult, that there's no way we create soldiers who would be this weak. And I'm making air quotes. You can't see me, but
oh my gosh,
the derision that they got.
He's anything but, by the way, if you've never read this book.
Yeah, this kid goes through everything. I mean, it's
such a brave character.
Right. But this is it's up there, but they say in the Red Badge of Courage, it's one of those first novels that really talked about war in a very explicit way. And he did it intentionally because he felt like people really didn't understand what he went through.
They didn't.
And they didn't.
Yeah. And it's his own experience. And one of the things that reading this book and learning about this author reminded me so much of Slaughterhouse-Five.
Same.
And Kurt Vonnegut's writing about his own personal experience. I mean, he lived that. So how can you say it's not accurate? How can you say it's not a true portrayal when it is literally this person's experience?
Right.
And I really thought, like, we'll talk about the plot and everything in a moment, but there are a lot of similarities I found between this and Slaughterhouse-Five.
Same.
And it's so brilliant. But anyway, he's not the first German author that we've talked about that the Nazis, who wrote a globally renowned book, and then the Nazis burned them. The books, I mean.
The books, yeah. So Goebbels had it was immediately put in schools in Germany. And then it was immediately also just as quickly taken out because of the propaganda that happened with the Nazis. But anyway, so he escapes, our author, and he lives with his first wife in Switzerland. And then his sister is unfortunately was killed by the Nazis because of her association with him. They burned books. The Nazis burned this book in public. They went to homes and said, give us your copy or you're going to have a problem. The brown shirts did this. There was a movie that came out in 1930, the same year this book is released in America. The film is filmed in Southern California. And I don't know if you've ever seen it. I was just started watching clips of it.
I haven't.
It's really good. And it's also visually, you're just like, they created this in 1930. It's just fantastic. But also,
I must find it.
1930, I'm sure Southern California was pretty much desolate. I mean, you had a lot of areas where you could film these big battle scenes. Then the brown shirts were they had to cut the movie differently there because they had to take out all the anti-war stuff, which is not much left if but it's an anti-war novel, unapologetically, with no, whatever.
I think it's more accurate to say it is a war memoir. I mean, it's a novel, it's fiction, but it's anti-war in that it tells the truth about war, and when you see the actual practical truth, what it looks like in these soldiers' lives, only a monster would be in favor of war after learning about it in this way.
So he loses his sister. He comes to America. He divorces the first wife, Jean, and then Ilsa. He married her twice. And there was a whole reason why, but I forget. Well, they get divorced and they get back together, I think for her citizenship in Switzerland.
Yes, there was a way to kind of get her out, right? Because, yes,
to save
that's
her.
Right. Yes.
So then he gets her out, and then he goes to America because there's a price on his head because of the Nazis. So he goes to America. He meets Marlene Dietrich, and they have an affair for a while. He's a man about town, but he's also somebody like they're asking him about this book and what's going on. And anyway, he does marry Paulette Goddard, the actress, and they have a very happy marriage. And then he lives to 1970. And Paulette, so there was a movie that came out in 1930. Then there's one that comes out in 1979, and it's Richard Thomas. And we talked about John Boy.
Yes. So that one, I've seen some of that one. Yeah.
Yes. I remember I was a kid that was on. I was little, but so anyway, so this is what we're talking about now. This is the story is about this group of our protagonist. It's done in the first person, and his name is Paul. And he's he's a kid, 17, 18 years old, and he's eager to join the war front and his parents don't want him to go, but all of his friends are going to go.
All his friends. So he goes, they're told that they will be covered in glory, basically, you will be heroes, you'll get chicks, the whole thing. And he and his schoolmates, because they are boys, they go and they sign up. Not having any earthly idea what it is that they're signing up for. And the book opens with them when the book opens, they've already been at war for some time, and um they're already quite hardened and seasoned soldiers, and they've seen a lot of devastation by the time that the book opens, and they're looking at these younger new recruits just like them who signed up not knowing what was going on, and they thought it was just going to be some kind of a frat party or something, and they show up and it's like hellfire, and Paul kind of reflects back and forth, and also his friends that he's with. And this was a thing that in World War One and in World War Two, I don't know about after that, but I know that in World War One and in World War Two, they would send boys, young men who like were all from the same village. They would all serve together or all from the same neighborhood, so you were with. So these boys that has signed up with, he's known them. He talks about like one of them in particular that he's known since they were like, kindergarten age.
Mm-hmm.
They've known each other all their lives. They know each other's moms. So they really have a history and this shared innocence. And that's good in a lot of ways because you kind of need that in that situation, but it's also devastating when they lose each other because the loss is so deep. It goes so right, just right to their very, very roots. So we don't, we don't get any kind of backstory or lead up into like where we are in the war, what were the circumstances that led to them being sent where they were sent or anything like that. We're just like, boom, we're right there. They're coming into a camp after a horrible battle where they lost most of their company.
Mm-hmm.
And you were just right in there. And talking about the Red Badge of Courage, when I read that book, what I remember about the experience of reading it was I kind of just felt like I just couldn't get into it. Something about it, I don't know. I couldn't relate to it. And I remember it was just a real slog for me to get through. It was, I'm talking like in high school, right? Trying to get through this. But somehow this book, because it's his writing style or something, here I am, a middle-aged, Latina mom of two in California, and I am like all in. I totally relate to this kid who has a completely different life experience than I do. And just, it's such beautiful writing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the translation that we're reading really pulls you in. You really feel like you're there immediately.
Yeah.
I just loved this book. So then each of them kind of reminisces about their time, before the war. They have this commander, Kaczynski, who's an older gentleman. He's like 40,
Mm-hmm.
and he's sort of in charge of them, and he becomes kind of a father figure to them. I mean, the descriptions of the foxholes, the trenches,
Right.
and just the absolute carnage that they have to face all day, every day, all night, every night.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh.
And they're
It's
hungry.
unforgettable.
They like,
Yeah, they have nothing. They have nothing that they need.
they have, yeah, the clothing that they're so short on clothing that they just wear the suits of the men who died before them.
Yeah.
One of his friends dies in a hospital. He lost his leg. Before he's even dead, one of them's like, I need his boots. Those are good boots. Mine are a mess. And they're in the trenches, y'all. Like, he does need those boots. And those are the things that they're constantly trying to make sense of. And when they, my favorite parts were when they were talking about the generals and everybody that's in charge. I don't know what they're called in a German army, but the people that are in charge, they're like, it's like a couple of dozen people that like make these policies, and all these other people have to suffer because of them. All these young men.
Yeah.
They have no say. I mean, it's just they have to, and it's like, who are these people who are these men that are sending these boys to war, and what is their purpose? And they're not like, they're starving. They don't know what they're doing. It's boring work. It's laborious work. These trenches, like when there's rain, they're just stuck in mud. As Margos said, they have sometimes gaslight, like fire torches that will fire you.
Days, like, oh,
It's so rough. And then
and your friends are being killed.
and your
Like,
friends
right,
are being
your friends
killed.
are being killed right next to you.
The-
Literally right next to you, day after day.
and you can't do anything. You can't help them. And also, like, you can't even mourn for a second. You have to keep going because
Nope.
you're under
Nope.
fire. So you have
No
to.
time.
No time. In the story, in the story, he goes home. He has a few incidents, chances to go home.
This not in the movie, which we'll talk about in a minute, but at one point he is granted a little bit of leave to go home because I don't remember, he like has swallowed some poison gas or something, and he needs to recover, and so he can be in shape to go back to the front. They send him back to his village, but he's been removed for so long and has had so much happen to him that he can't. This is the part that reminded me of Slaughterhouse-Five, which opens about talking about the main character becoming unstuck in time.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of what has happened to Paul, that he's become unstuck in time and unstuck in place, that he can't in any way like relate to, communicate. He doesn't want to visit the horror that he's experienced on his loved ones, at all. So he feels like he can't, it's like he's an alien in this place that is his home.
Yeah.
It's so sad. It's probably the saddest part of the whole book.
He's going to his childhood bedroom and he's looking at his old stuff and he's like, yeah, I can't do that anymore. That's not me anymore. It's only like been a couple of years, but he's so different. And then on top of everything, he comes home, his mother's sick and his mother has cancer and is going to die.
Yeah.
And he has that, and then he also he has his friend's mother, one of his friends who died. He visits her, and all she wants to know is what happened. Like anybody would want to know what happened, and the only thing he could say is, "Oh, it was very quick. It was very painless. He didn't even know what happened." That kind of thing.
Which it wasn't, by the way.
No, and the deaths here are brutal. He doesn't just go away from the scene. They tell you exactly what happened, and
it's very realistic. It reminded me too of it's often been said about our gun culture here in America that if part of the reason for its perpetuation is that we don't ever see in the media, like we hear the reports about this or that incident, but no one ever really shows, what does that actually look like when we say this many people in a mass shooting? Like none of us really has, unless you're there, none of us really has an idea of what does that actually look like, sound like, and so on. And he goes into tremendous realistic detail every single moment of suffering that that his friends are experiencing.
Yeah. He also, there's also a section in the book where there are moments where they have a little bit of levity. They're in France, and so there's a few French women that he and his friends kind of flirt with and talk to. Everyone is just looking for connection. They're just looking to not be afraid for a few minutes. They're always just kind of looking for those other things. Every once in a while, like they get, they go to a home, and I think Kat is the older one. He steals a goose. And he takes it back, and they start cooking it, and they make a feast for themselves. But then the smoke attracts the Germans. Paul is making flapjacks, making pancakes, and he takes it to a trench for a while to keep cooking. They're so conditioned for this that they just, in the midst of all of this, they can find ways to kind of try to feel a little bit human. It happens a few times, but yeah, it's very hard. It's a terribly sad story.
And I'm just thinking too, like I just was talking about how realistically he details the deaths of his various friends. who all die.
Every single one.
But it's not gratuitous. It never feels like he's like, okay, I'm going to bring up Jaws yet again.
Please.
We talk about Jaws. One of the reasons we hate that book, if I could speak for both of us.
Yes.
One of the reasons we hate the book Jaws is that it is gross. It is one of the grossest books I've ever read. It is gratuitously, unnecessarily disgusting. in several scenes where you're like, you didn't need to bring this up, sir. But this really is, Paul, he's a kid and he's trying to make sense of what he's seeing. He's trying to just process what is happening to him. And so even though it's tremendously detailed, it never feels gratuitous. I thought, in thinking and reflecting on it, and it's one of these books too that you kind of can't stop thinking about once you've read it.
Yeah.
It's just so realistic. So, spoiler alert. We spoil everything on this show. So, and I don't think by telling what happens in this book and movie, this is one of those where I don't think it ruins the experience of reading the book or watching the movie. At the end of it's so here's one thing too about the book. As I said, when it opens, we are right there. We are in the war with the young men. Somebody who was reading the book when it came out would have been acutely aware in a way that you and I aren't in the 21st century, acutely aware at which point in the war we're talking about. So when they say where they are and what the date is, the contemporary audience of the time would have known, oh, that's at this point of the war when this happened and that happened, and how much time of the war is left. But you and I reading it don't necessarily know that.
Right.
So when we get to the end of the book, it's at a point where the war is basically over. So as we know, because here in the US, we celebrate Veterans Day on November 11th. That is because the armistice was decided so the war was decided to end on the 11th day of the 11th month in 1918 at 11 a.m. A lot of the fighting had stopped by then, but there was still some fighting going on. And Paul is part of this last holdout of fighting when the Germans pretty much knew. And he says this in the book. And I think this is one of the reasons why the book is banned, because not so much because of the brutal reality of war that he talks about, but he also talks about they knew they lost.
Yeah.
And yet they're still fighting. And so you, the reader, are like, well, why are they still fighting? And so Paul dies, and his death is doubly pointless because the war is over, but they're still pushing these young men to fight. And I was looking up I was doing a lot of looking up about World War I, of course, while I was reading this book. On that last day, if you want to call it, not even the last day, the last, morning of the war, because it ended at 11 a.m., because we have to be poetic. So it has to be on the 11th hour of the 11th day. Da, 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 da. So for the price of that, over 2,700 soldiers died that last morning of the war, knowing the war was over, knowing that this is supposed to be like celebration time. How angry would you be if you were the mother of one of those soldiers on that day? I would just be, I would never stop being enraged.
I mean, your 18-year-old boy going off to war, your son, I don't know how, they're made of stern stuff. And his mother's dying. So when his friend Kat dies, he's carrying his friend. They're like Margos said, it's the end of the war. Like they're partying. They're having.
This part of the book is so sad.
He's carrying his friend, and then his friend is shot at. So as he's that he thinks he's passed.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's different in the book again than it is in the movie. In the book, his cat is shot like in the leg or something. So it's not a mortal wound, but he is bleeding out
Mm-hmm.
and he is kind of lightheaded in consciousness and he can't walk. And so Paul's carrying him to the nearest hospital and everybody else in their unit has died. Everybody else has died. And he gets to the hospital and the doctor's like, well, why'd you do that? Because this guy's dead. And he's like, no, it's just a leg wound. He's like, well, yeah, he does have a leg wound, but also he's got this head wound. Clearly, he got shot through the head at some point while you were bringing him back. Or maybe it was before. We don't know. But
Right.
anyway, that final loss, he becomes totally untethered. Really doesn't, I don't want to say he's lost the will to live, but
But
he's lost any kind of, they say go fight, even though he knows the war's over. It's like, okay, and there he goes. And yeah, just
he
it's so sad.
it's also, he
Gosh, it's sad.
he they're so young that they're experiencing this, and he often says, I have no idea what I'm going to do when we're done. Like, what am I going to do for a living?
Yeah.
How am I going to live? He can't imagine what he's going to do just as a human being, just living day to day. He doesn't know how he's going to be able to do that.
How do I go have a normal life?
Right. I mean,
Yeah.
because some of the older friends, they're married, they have kids, there's fighting for something, right? They're telling themselves, like, this
Yeah.
is for my son, so they don't have to fight. That's what he doesn't have that. And he's losing his mother, and he lost all of his friends, and he doesn't know even why they're there. And it's not a very clear reason why, except just everybody got mad at each other. And it's been a while since there had been a big war. So it can't be that big of a deal.
Yeah, it was a lot of little, yeah, it and also, like, how could you, if you weren't in it, who could possibly comprehend the technology and the poison gas? I mean, it sounds made up. Poison gas and flamethrowers. When we were talking about like arrows and bayonets, like
Yeah.
not that long before this, it's such a great book. And again, it's so beautifully written. And so Paul dies at the very end. He's killed on the day the war is ended, the morning the war has ended. And at the moment, the reason the book is called what it's called is at the moment that he dies, the announcement is made that the war is over and it's all quiet on the Western Front, which is where he's been fighting for no reason. It's, as Margos says, it's been adapted many times. I'm sure it's influenced a lot of other works, including Slaughterhouse-Five. I kind of can't stop thinking about it, but I didn't even know until you told me about this Netflix movie.
It came out 2 years ago in 2022. I think it premiered at the Toronto Film Festival that year. Should we play the trailer? Should we
Yeah.
transition to? Okay, so this is the official trailer. You'll hear some German here. I managed to pull a few clips in English, but you'll hear a little bit of German
good.
here.
Okay, good.
Deutsche Sozialdemokraten, unser geliebtes Volk wehrlos machen.
Wir bleiben zusammen, ja, Paul? Wir bleiben zusammen.
Ich habe Angst vor dem, was kommt.
So this is the third adaptation of this material. We had a 1930 movie. We had a 1979 television movie. Both of those were filmed here in America. So this is the first time Germany is taking on this material. And it was sort of like, why didn't they do this in the first place? Especially after Das Boot, like they could make big, great war movies.
Yeah.
But they didn't because they didn't. So, but we have Edward Berger here. He adapted a screenplay that's just a little bit different from the book, but I love the differences. So he's our director. Okay, so it's Felix Kammerer as Paul Baumer. This is his first
Spectacular
movie role. He's a theater actor from Austria. Albrecht.
What?
Yes. This is his first film. And the whole film is around him, his face, his expressions. And he's on the poster, like
he's just doing with his face and body.
His expressions are just heartbreaking. It's Albrecht Schuck as Kat, Aaron Hilmer as Albert Kropp, Maurice,
wonderful,
very good. Maurice Kloss as Franz Müller, Adrian Grunwald as Ludwig Wem, Eden Hasanovic as Jaden Stackfleet, Daniel Bruhl as Matthias Erzberger, Tybalt de Malteber, General Folk, David Strizo as General Friedrichs, Andreas Stoller as Lieutenant Hope, and Sebastian Hulk as Major von Brixdorf. In the movie, they begin with the kids, the boys, getting a lecture about joining the army and why they should do this.
Yes, and they're in their little school uniforms with their little matching hats. And I really think that was a great choice because, again, in the 21st century, anybody reading the book, like from the first paragraph, you would know that these were boys who grew up together and they were from the same village, right? But in the 21st century, you don't necessarily know that. So this is a great way. It takes care of a lot of exposition that we see them as these schoolboys, that they clearly have a history together, a long history. They've known each other for many years. And these are the circumstances under which they were convinced to enlist. And in Paul's case, to fake his mother's signature, to join for the glory of the fatherland. And so I really liked that choice.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things, again, like Margos said, there's a lot of things that are different than that are in the book. In the movie, I don't think we ever have the part where he goes home to his village.
He doesn't, no.
We never see his mom or anything like that. But I also, another choice that's in the movie that's not in the book at all is you also simultaneously, while you're seeing what the boys are going through, you're also seeing the leaders who are making these decisions to put the boys into battle and how far removed from the actual war these horrible people are. And also, oh, go ahead.
Oh, they're in. So I mean, it's very real. They filmed it. There are no CGI. There's no CGI going on here, by the way. There are hundreds of extras. All of them are in period costumes. It's amazing. The cinematography won an Academy Award from James Friend. It deserves it because this is a beautiful looking picture.
We were talking about the generals who are in these palaces.
Yes, thank you.
You know, making choices like they're playing with little toy soldiers instead of human beings.
When were you born, Brixdorf?
1877, in June.
A summer child.
Yes.
What about your father?
My family lived in Holstein and he has a factory there.
Producing what?
Riding saddles, General.
Riding saddles. Something that will always sell. Your future is secure then.
I am indeed fortunate.
And? Are you looking forward to going home? When we are no longer needed here?
Yes. After the war, a position of responsibility awaits me. I will take over the business.
Congratulations.
And you?
I'm a soldier. My father was an officer in this regiment. He fought in the 3 wars under Bismarck. He won all 3 of them. In 1871, he marched on Paris, and when he returned, he was a hero. I was too late in being born, Brixdorf. It's been 50 years of no war. What is a soldier without war?
Yeah, and one of them is trying to explain to them that, like, at one point the German, the France is asking for Germany to surrender, and Germany doesn't want to because they're proud, but at the same time they're losing like crazy, and
They're really losing.
yeah, and they're trying to tell them, so they're trying to to make that happen. At the same time, I love the scene where they're having dinner and it's like the US leader and the German leader, and then they're at beautiful plates and they have like fresh oysters and they have good bottles of wine, and they're talking about like, so what are you going to do when you go back? And one guy's like, I have a saddle horse, horse saddles. And the other guy's like, man, I've always wanted to be in war. I never got to be in one. It's not good, no good being a soldier if you don't have a war. Basically. Yeah. And just like, really, dude, this is all, they just don't get like what is actually happening away from them. There are incredible scenes of just, first, when they're getting their uniforms and the fact that they just take all the old uniforms that people died in, clean it as best they can.
Yep. Just put a patch on the bullet hole and give it on to the next soldier.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a great scene when you see all the seamstresses.
Yes.
Mending the uniforms of the dead, and they're like, come on, time's a wasting. Let's get these out there. I mean, it's the scenes are just unforgettable, and they're so. I mean, we weren't there, but they're so realistic. We know these things actually happen. The scene where they first see tanks. How terrifying.
It's like, and
how scary is that thing?
I wonder, did George Lucas read this story? Because this is very Star Wars. Like,
it's very Star Wars.
It's very Star Wars, like when they're out in the desert. Yeah. So like they're there in the trenches and they're used to just shooting people. They're shooting at a tank. I mean, they have
you're like, what are you doing? You can't shoot a tank.
Get out of there. Just get out of there. But they can't. There's nowhere to go. They're just gonna get. So there's mayhem in the trenches as they try to go out, try to figure out what to do. Some of the French are just jumping in there. People are trying to jump out of it. The French are actually lighting them on fire in there. And then when the tanks come in, the tanks just roll over people and you see it.
Yeah.
The special effects. I saw a documentary. It was on Netflix. So this is streaming on Netflix and they have like a, right. Anyway, behind the scenes thing. And they had like all these bodies created, like these dummy model bodies, like to go around, and the various stages of deterioration and the wounds that they had. It's just, it feels so real. And in that moment, and like you're
It really
experiencing
does.
it with them, and it's terrifying.
Yeah.
And
One of the most difficult scenes, and this is a scene in the book, is where Paul is he's in a just a muddy hole somewhere, and he's again hand-to-hand combat, which there's a lot with this French soldier who, it's where it's like it's him or me. It's not about politics, it's not about country, fatherland, what's it, but Paul's going to die or this Frenchman's going to die. And Paul, stabs the Frenchman, and he's so exhausted, he's so underfed and exhausted, he can't get out of there. He can't just like run.
right.
So he's there waiting for this fellow to die, or he's there getting the strength up to get out of there. But meanwhile, he's listening to this Frenchman die, and it takes
Forever.
forever.
It's so brutal.
Forever
This
for
man
this man.
suffers. This man
Oh, it's
completely
so awful.
suffers.
It's horrible in the book, and it's the movie really captures it. These are things that happened.
Yeah. And the whole point is like they're making us see it so that we really understand what can happen when we, I don't know, it's a beautiful story. It's beautifully acted. There are moments.
The score is so good.
The score is just exceptional. And the cinematography, the cost, the art direction. I mean, it's all.
Yeah.
It was nominated for several Academy Awards. It didn't win for Best Picture. It should have. It won for Best International Feature. It was nominated for Best Screenplay. It won for Best Original Score, for production design, for cinematography, which they absolutely deserved. And it was nominated for sound and visual effects and
Beautiful.
makeup. It's just, it's a beautiful looking film. I don't go to movie theaters very often now, but I would totally want to see this on a big screen.
This would warrant definitely a big screen.
Yeah.
It's and all the like close-ups of each person gets a good amount of close-up time where you're, again, a lot of facial acting. You could watch this whole thing with the sound off and totally get the entire story.
Yeah.
It's the costumes, like you said, and I really love, like, it really, and the score really helps this a lot, that you really get how it's a 20th century war being waged in a 19th or even 18th century landscape. And society. I mean, these are rural farmers who don't have electricity, they don't have phones or running water, and you're coming in with tanks and flamethrowers. What is that? And I don't even know what else to say about it. It was so good. It was just so good. And it's a beautiful adaptation of this beautiful book.
Yeah.
With just the right, the changes and little detours that we take, I think are really important to help us, a 21st century audience, really get at stuff that the audience at the time would have just taken for granted and known that we don't know, but they would have been aware of. And all of those extra decisions to show the generals, to show the boys at school, that really helps us to kind of contextualize it in the way that we need to. Love. Now, what do you think, book or movie?
I'm going to say a tie this time.
Ew.
I immediately as sad as the movie is, I wanted to watch it again. Like, because I was so, it's magnetic. I mean, it's just hypnotizing. Like, when you watch it, it's hard to look away. It's so powerful. But this story, and I got the audiobook for this, and I got it from Libby. It's really easy to get this. But the story, that last chapter, I was sobbing.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
Sobbing.
Yeah.
Helplessly.
It's so sad.
It's so sad.
So
it's devastating.
Sad.
But it's
like he's carrying Cat. He's carrying Cat, and you just know.
Yeah.
You just know. Like, Oh, you don't. But he's going to carry him. He's going to carry him all the way to the hospital.
And he
sure is.
does, and
Oh.
they're just telling him, oh God, that scene where the doctor, he's saying, no, he's just unconscious, he's fine, and they're like, no,
Yeah, no, he's really not.
he's really not, and
Oh,
yeah, so yeah, that's how I feel. How do you feel?
I think I agree. I think it's a tie, and I think they kind of, for us again in 2024, they kind of go together. I think if I were a teacher and I were teaching this book, I would also show this movie because, like I
Definitely.
said, there's a lot of stuff that Remarque, and nobody can blame him for this. That everybody just knew. Everybody just knew what it was like to lose. What World War I was like, and he was just expressing that. Everybody knew how devastating it was to have this crazy, all these new weapons of war, and seeing them for the very first time, seeing an airplane for the very first time, and you're on the battlefield and shooting at you. People would just have known that, and we don't know that today. So this movie really helps us in 2024 to give it the context that it needs, I think.
Yeah.
So I think I think of them now as companion pieces. I'm just blown away by this book,
Yeah.
though. I was so impressed immediately by his writing. So that's it. That's all Quiet on the Western Front.
Yeah, so that's our BAM Books month,
Woo!
y'all. Yeah, it's a big one to end with. Lots to think about. Next week, we have something really fun planned. So it's October. We like to do spooky, scary movies. We definitely would love some recommendations if y'all have one, but please check out our site first. Make sure that we didn't cover it. But anyway, we're talking about The Day the Earth Stood Still. It's a fabulous movie. I've seen that a few times. I've never read this. It's based on a short story. So that's what's coming up next week. Please reach out to us in all those places I mentioned at the top of the show with your ideas and suggestions. And our email, once again, is bookversusmoviepodcast, spelled it all out, at gmail.com. And Margot, where can they find you?
You can find me online at coloniabook.com, and all my social media callouts are at She's Nacho Mama. And where can they find you?
You can find me at brooklynfitchick.com. I'm at brooklynfitchick for Threads and Instagram. I'm at Brooklyn Margot for TikTok and Twitter. Okay, everyone, we'll be back soon with a new episode. Thank you so much for listening to the Book versus Movie podcast. We're a part of the Frolic Podcast Network. You could find more podcasts you will love at frolic.media/podcasts. You could find us on Twitter, Threads, Blue Sky, and Instagram at Book versus a Movie. Just spelled it all out. We have a Patreon page. Type in there Book vs Movie Podcast, where you can find 8 years worth of